All right. So today I'm going to teach you guys how to beat your friends at poker. So I don't know how experienced all you guys are at poker, but just in case like you need to brush up, I'm just going to go real quick through just like the basic rules and just make sure that you remember everything. So do you guys know all of the hand rankings for poker? Is anyone not like familiar at all with this? Okay, got it. Okay.
Could you zoom in a little bit?
Oh, is it hard to see?
Play poker with novel later.
Yeah.
Just do command plus. Yeah, command plus.
Oh, sorry. Wait. Let's see.
Yeah.
Is that good enough?
Yeah. Omaha tournament as soon as the talks are done.
All right. So basically, for what I'm going to be talking about, which is Texas Hold'em, everyone's dealt 2 cards, and then everyone has chips in front of them, and eventually there will be 5 cards dealt on the board, which will give you first 3 on the flop, then 1 more on the turn, 1 more on the river. Those are just the names of the sets of cards that are dealt. But basically, by the end, you'll have 2 cards in your hand and 5 cards on the board, and using those 7 cards, you'll make the best 5-card hand. And the 5-card hands that you can make are in this list right here. So the worst thing you could have is high card, which is more of a lack of anything rather than actually having something. So basically, you have no pair and no actual straight or flush or anything like working together.
Like nothing ace high is just high card.
And one thing that's important to mention is that one high card hand can beat another high card hand. Basically, you just compare the highest card and then you work your way down. So if somebody has, an ace in their high card hand, that will beat somebody who only has the highest card as a king, and so on. Next, you have one pair, which in this example, you have the pair of 3s. So any one pair beats any high card hand, and then given that 2 hands are both one pair, the higher pair wins. And also, it goes all the way down. So if 2 people have the same pair, it also matters what the other cards are. These are known as kickers because basically, in addition to your pair, you do want a high kicker. That does add value.
It's like a tiebreaker.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, and it goes in like lexicographic order all the way down. So it's like.
Next is 2 pairs. So in this case, you can see we have 2 3s and 2 jacks. And I'm just going to go through all this really quickly. 3 of a kind. So as you can see, we have 3 jacks here. A straight is next. So in this case, we have 7, 8, 9, 10 jack. So basically 5 consecutive cards in order. Next is a flush. So it's 5 cards of the same suit. So in this case, all 5 are diamonds. After that, we have full house. So full house is basically 3 of a kind with a pair. So in this case, we have 3 10s and 2 8s. Next, now we're getting into the category where if you hit this hand, you're like almost guaranteed to win. But next is 4 of a kind. So as you can see, we have 4 10s here. And then straight flush, which is when you have both a straight and a flush with the same 5 cards. So in this case, you can see that they're all hearts, and we have 3 through 7. And then lastly, royal flush, which is really just a glorified straight flush that is the highest possible straight flush. Okay. Any confusions about that so far? No? All right, let's move on. And so for the betting rounds...
Oh, of course.
You start with pre-flop, and everybody gets dealt 2 cards, and you can make some bets and raises during that period before you see any of the next cards, right? So here you see that I have pocket aces, and Lee is dealt pocket 6s. So since I have a really good hand, I'm probably going to be raising, and Lee will probably call me with his 6s to try to see the board. And then next, we'll have a flop. So 3 cards will be dealt face up. Everyone will see these. So in this case, right? And so I might bet here because I think my aces are a good hand on this board. And Lee might call me because he might suspect that I'm bluffing, right?
You define call and all that.
Oh, okay, right. So betting is when you want to place more chips into the pot, right? And then for your opponent to continue in the hand, they either have to match the bet that you've put out, which is called a call, right? Or they can also continue by raising you, so betting an even larger amount. But if they don't want to at least match your amount, then they have to fold. So folding is just throwing away your hand and giving up the pot to your opponents.
You win the pot when either everyone but you folds and you're the last one left, or when it gets to the fifth card and there's at least two people still there, then whoever has the better hand gets the whole pot.
Right, so the hand will end either when there's only one person left because of everyone else folding, or we get to the very last card and finally the betting is finished and then everyone shows their hands. Yep. So in this hand, what I was saying was I would bet the flop and Lee might call me, and then the next card would be dealt, which is a 6, because Lee is a lucky bastard and he always hits the best hand. And then some more betting might happen. Lee might raise me. Anyway, and then eventually we'd get to the river, probably get to showdown, and I would be very upset that my ace is lost. Anyway, so that's the general structure for that. So now that you know everything there is to know about the rules of poker, I'll just kind of rapid fire walk you guys through a couple of different strategy ideas and tips. So first, the one thing everyone wants to do in poker, bluffing, right? So what is bluffing? Bluffing is making a bet with a weak hand where your goal is to get your opponent to fold a hand that is better than yours. Right? So you cannot bluff if you have a good hand. So for example, if the board is the same as the one above, but instead your hand is 7-8, then your hand on the river would be a good candidate for bluffing because of two reasons. First of all, it has almost no hope of winning in a showdown because you have 8 high, and your hand, so you have no pair, no straight, no anything, and your hand won't even beat an opponent with just ace high, right? And then secondly, there's also a good chance that if you make a strong bet, your opponent will fold a lot of hands that are maybe slightly better or a decent amount better than yours, but still not very strong. So for example, if your opponent has ace high here, or they have a pair of 3s, right? When you make a big bet, they might be concerned that you have a jack or something strong like that. And so they'll probably fold, and that way they'll give up the pot to you, even though you actually had the worst hand. Okay, so let's say you're bluffing here, or you're considering a bluff here, and the pot has $30 in it, and you want to bet $20 as a bluff, right? So how often does your bluff need to work for it to be profitable? We're getting a little bit into the math here, but anyone want to venture a guess? So $30 in the middle, and then you're betting another $20.
I feel like cheating.
Any guesses?
Nope.
Just throw out a number, percent,
50%.
Okay. Anybody else?
I think it's lower.
Lower?
Yeah.
What would you say?
30.
30%?
Is it
Okay.
1 out of 13? Because there's only one card that'll make you. No. Never mind.
Oh, okay. No, it's we're on the river, so there's no more cards to be dealt. So you have no chance of winning, other than your opponent folding. So in this case, because the pot has $30 in it, and you're betting another 20, if they fold at least 40% of the time, then it's gonna work out for you, because when they fold 40% of the time, you're gonna win the $30 40% of the time, and then the other 60% of the time, you'll lose your $20 that you're betting. So it breaks out. It breaks even in the end. So if they fold 50% or 60% or even more, then it's definitely a very profitable bluff that you should be definitely doing. And yeah, there are a lot of cases like this where basically the numbers and the amounts in the pot and the amount that you bet kind of give you a percentage that you need your bluff to work. And so if you're thinking about just these numbers and these percentages while you're playing, you're already miles ahead of a lot of players. All right, next topic. The next topic is semi-bluffing. So this is also bluffing because you're still trying to get your opponent to fold a hand that has a better chance of winning than you do. But the difference between this and pure bluffing is that even though you might be called, in this case, you're not like completely hopeless because you still have a chance to make the best hand. So semi-bluffing is a very important strategy in poker because if you're just pure bluffing all the time with no actual like hand value or hope of winning, then you're just going to be kind of lighting your money on fire in situations where there's no hope of getting it back, right? But with semi-bluffing, what you're usually doing is if you have a straight draw. So for this instance, if you have 10-8 on this board of 3, 9, and Jack, you have 4 cards to a straight, right? You have 8, 9, 10, Jack. And so if either a 7 or a queen were to come in the next 2 cards, you'll make a straight, which is a very strong hand that you can bet a lot of money for. So, on this board, you should definitely be inclined to bet into your opponent because this way they'll fold a lot of hands that aren't very strong but are actually doing better than you. So for example, if your opponent has a 9 pair and you don't, but it's likely they'll fold because if you apply enough pressure, because they'll be worried you have a Jack or better, right? And similarly, a flush draw, or in this case even a combination flush draw and straight draw. So as you can see, we have ace-5 of diamonds on this board. So we have 4 diamonds for a flush draw, and we have a straight draw if we hit a 3, because that would give us ace 2, 3, 4, 5. So in this hand, we can be very aggressive. We can bet and raise a lot of money, because basically in this case, what we're looking for is fold equity, which means we have 2 ways to win the hand. The first way is that our opponent folds, and we just take the pot down right now. And that's our fold equity. And the second way, because we're semi-bluffing, is that even if they call, we can still make the best hand if we hit a diamond or an ace or a 3 for a straight in this case. So that's a very important tool. All right, just a couple more. Yeah, okay, so for a little bit more math concepts, I want to talk about pot odds right now, which is, let's say, on the river, you have a medium strength hand, right? Like second pair. And then the pot is $20 and your opponent bets another $20. And you know that this usually means they have a strong hand, but it also means there's a good chance that they could be bluffing still. So if you're thinking about calling this bet, how often do you need to win in order to make it justifiable? Any guesses? 10%, 70%? Just throw out a number.
13%. 10% of the time?
Okay. Okay, so it's actually going to be 33% of the time, because basically you're risking $20 to win $40, right? Because there's the pot, $20, and there's your opponent's bet of $20. So if you win a third of the time, you should call. So this can mean sometimes like you expect that you're usually going to lose, but you're still going to make the call because there's enough of a chance that you're going to win that you should call. Another example of when you think about pot odds is, let's say you're holding ace of spades, 3 of spades on this board right here. So as you can see, there's 2 spades, so we have the highest possible flush draw. And just based on the numbers, we'll make our flush on the river about 20% of the time if another spade comes. So let's say our opponent bets $10 into a pot that is $30. Should we call? So if we look at it this way, we're putting in $10 to win a potential $40, right? And we will win that 20% of the time. So based on those numbers, that would be a break-even call based on that. But, and this is getting to the next topic, implied odds. There's another reason even to make this call, which is that if we do make our hand, the betting is not over, right? We have the best hand possible, and we can potentially win more bets on the river. So that's basically what implied odds means. Implied odds means that when you do hit your hand, you expect to be able to put in more bets and basically win more money from your opponent. And so because of implied odds, with this drawing hand right here, we can actually call a much bigger bet than $10 into this pot of $30, because we can expect that, if we hit our flush on the river, there's a chance our opponent also has a flush, and we can win a very big pot. There's a chance that our opponent has a strong hand right now and may not be able to get away from it when the flush comes. They could have a straight already, they could have 2 pair, something like that. And then a second very good example of implied odds is, let's say we're in a $1, $2 blinds game, and we have $300 in front of us. And we have an opponent who's in early position who raises to $6. And we know that this is a pretty tight player. Tight player means that they only play strong hands. And we find ourselves looking or considering whether or not we should call with 3 of hearts, 3 of clubs. So let's say hypothetically we know our opponent is like a super, super tight player, and they will only make this raise with either pocket aces or pocket kings. What should we do here?
All in. That's how I play poker.
Can we just call?
Okay, so why would you call? What would you?
Because we know we want to see his reaction.
You want to see his reaction?
Yeah, because we know he's
You want to put your call out and him be like, whoa.
no, like what he's gonna do, like if he's gonna raise.
Okay. Any other ideas?
Kind of change mine to raise.
Raise? Why would you want to raise?
Because we want to combat like a tight player with an even tighter game. I don't know.
Well, here's the problem, right?
I would check because you said that he's tight.
No, it's pre-flop, so that you can't check. You can call, you can fold, or you can raise.
Okay, never mind.
So when he's saying, you know your opponent's very tight, will only make this with either aces or kings, what he's saying is you know that you're behind, because aces or kings both dominate a pair of threes.
Right.
They're
So
much better.
you don't want to go all in. You definitely don't want to go all in, because your opponent will definitely call you, and you will definitely just burn all your money on fire.
But the interest, so when you're saying like implied odds, the interesting thing is if you call, like, even though you're behind, if a 3 comes on the flop, then you've hit your set, so you have like 3 threes at that point, and that's higher than aces or kings, and then you might be able to like extract a good amount of money from the other player.
Your chance of thing is set 3 is about 1/12, so
No, it's 1/8.
1/8. Sorry, I'm 1/8, so it's a pretty good call there.
How much money do I have in my bank account?
In your stack, it's 300.
No, like how much? Like am I a million?
Oh, in your bank account. Hopefully a little more than 300.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, you can afford to risk it. Anyway, so in this case, we would definitely want to call because we are only putting in $6 to see the flop, and with a hand like this, pocket threes, we're looking to hit another 3 because we'll have 3 of a kind and it'll be extremely disguised, right? No one will suspect that, on like a board like this, that we would have 3 of a kind, right? And especially when our opponent is very tight and we know they'll have a very strong hand like aces or kings, it'll be very hard for them to get away from, playing a big pot when we do hit our 3. So we do want to call because while we're basically paying $6 now to try to see the 3 cards that come out, if we do get the 3, we have a potential to win 300, right? So it's well worth it because the chance of getting the 3 on the flop is about 1 in 8.
And so if your stack and your opponent's stack was only $20 each, then maybe you wouldn't call in that space because there's much less to win, and you still have the likeliest outcome is that you don't get a 3 and then your opponent's ahead and you lose.
So you
gotta make a lot of money on that one.
The amount of money you can win is the smaller of your stack and your opponent's
That's
stack.
exactly right. Yes.
Right. Other examples are when you have draws that will hit a very strong hand. So for example, if you have Jack-9 on a deuce 8-10 rainbow board, because when you do hit the straight, either the 7 or the queen, you have the nuts. The nuts means the best hand you can possibly have at that moment. And similarly for ace-8 of hearts on deuce 4 queen with 2 hearts, if you hit the flush, you will have the nut flush, which is the strongest hand you could have. So I've actually told you guys 2 concepts that go a little bit against each other, which are semi-bluffing and implied odds. And they actually kind of work in parallel because the way you should think about it is semi-bluffing is useful when you don't actually think your opponent necessarily has a very strong hand, right? Because you can bluff them out of the pot when they don't. And even if you were wrong and they do have a fairly strong hand, you can still win the pot by hitting your hand, right? Whereas if you think your opponent has a very strong hand, then you should just try to actually hit your draw, because then you have good implied odds on that. Because when you do hit your hand, they might not suspect it, and you can definitely win a big pot.
So when you were saying disguised earlier, it's interesting if there's, say, and poker gets really deep this way because it's a game of like partial information. Say there's 2 threes on the board, and you have the third 3, then people are going to be more wary about like giving you a lot of money because they see 2 threes and they're like, oh, what if someone has a third 3? Then they have. But if you have 2 threes in your hand and there's only 1 3 on the board, then no one's going to suspect that someone has trips, and then you can take more monies from them.
Right. More monies. Okay. We just have a few more topics left that I want to talk about, and then we can go into just questions. Okay, so this next thing is called continuation betting. So let's say you're on the button, which is the best position, and you have 8, 9 of hearts. Everyone else has folded to you. The blinds are $1 or $2. So what should you do?
Everyone has folded.
Everyone has folded to you. So it's just you and the 2 blinds, small blind and big blind.
Ah, okay.
So you can fold, call, or raise. Those are the options.
They always are not fold because you don't know anything yet about the game, about the blinds.
Okay. Everyone else?
I would call this one.
You would call this one? Okay.
Yeah, I would too.
Raise, come on.
Okay, so usually you should raise here because 2 reasons. You can steal the blinds pre-flop if both your opponents fold. And then even if they call you, you have a pretty decent hand that has a lot of potential. So that's not a bad option either. And the reason you raise rather than call is to give your opponents the opportunity to fold, right? Because if you call, then the blinds can just kind of come in for free and then see the flop and basically beat you on the flop. So raising here is also kind of like semi-bluffing because you don't mind stealing the pot right now, and you also don't really mind if they call you because you can still make a good hand. Anyway, so let's say you did raise to $6. The small blind folds and the big blind calls. So now there's $13 in the pot, and then the flop comes out ace of diamonds, 4 of clubs, jack of hearts. So you have absolutely nothing, and then your opponent checks to you. So what would you do here?
Bet. I would bet because then he'll think that you have an ace or a jack, and he'll probably, since he checked, he probably has nothing.
Uh-huh. Right, so this is one of the key things about Texas Hold'em, which is that given that you don't start with a pair, which most hands aren't a pair, like let's say you just have 2 cards, like a queen and a 9, right? The chance of you making a pair on the flop is only about 1/3. So 2/3 of the time, you'll just hit nothing, right? And so even though you hit nothing, your opponent also probably has nothing. The raiser, and you have the initiative in the hand, you can just make a bet, let's say $7 or $8 here, and most likely take down the pot. Because unless your opponent has an ace or maybe a jack, it's pretty hard for them to call you down. So this is known as continuation betting, and this is a pretty important strategy within poker because basically by taking the initiative and showing aggression, you can take down the pot without any real hand at all.
Part of why it works well in this spot is because it's only your heads up with one other guy. If there was like 3 other people to act behind you, then the chance that like one of them has an ace or a jack becomes pretty high.
Right.
And you don't want to do this.
So this works best, right? This works best when you're against one other opponent. If you raise and you get 4 people calling you and you hit nothing, you should usually just give up.
Because you have a pre-flop raiser, you're much more likely to have a good hand.
Right. Okay.
You're gonna get fancy.
Okay. One more thing I want to talk about is reverse implied odds, because I think this is something that a lot of new players will really kind of not quite get the concept of yet, and this is something that can potentially lose you a lot if you aren't aware of it. So let's say your opponent raises from early position, and they're a pretty tight player, and then you find yourself in the big blind, and you have a pretty good hand. You have King Jack, right? So what would you guys do?
Have you seen the flop yet?
No, you haven't. So they just made a raise, and you're deciding whether to call or fold or raise.
All in. 3-bet.
I like this guy's strategy. Okay, we should definitely play later.
Hey, David, can I borrow some money?
So with this hand, you should typically fold because, like we said earlier, you'll only make a pair 1/3 of the time. And even when you do hit that pair of kings or pair of jacks, it might not be the best hand because when your opponent raises from early position and they're a tight player, their possible hands include all sorts of things like 2 queens or ace king or even pocket aces, right? So you could hit your pair of jacks on a flop that's like, jack 4-3, and you would still lose to a decent amount of these hands. Or you could hit your pair of kings and you lose to ace king because your kicker is dominated. So basically, unlike implied odds, with reverse implied odds, you're drawing to a hand that is still not going to win. So you're basically paying money to try to see if you'll lose even more money, which is a really bad proposition. So in this case, you should typically fold. And this can also happen not just pre-flop, but also post-flop. So for example, if you are drawing to a straight, then there's also a flush draw on the board. For example, if you have queen-jack on a flop of 10-9 deuce, if you make your straight on the turn with either the 8 of spades or the king of spades, you could potentially lose a big pot if someone's holding a flush, right?
Because then you just made your straight and they just made their flush, and now you're both going to be inclined to bet a lot, but they're going to be the one who actually wins. And then that's sad.
Right. So basically, the moral of the story here is don't just try to call and hit your hand when you don't even know that it's necessarily going to be good. It's much better to try to call and hit your hand when you know that your hand is the nuts when you do hit it. But if you're not so sure, you might want to consider semi-bluffing instead, like raising them or betting strong. And then lastly, as just a quick tip, one of the biggest important keys to poker is position. So position is basically being last to act after the flop. So if you're on the button and you play your hand, once the flop comes out, your opponent has to decide what to do before you get to decide what to do. So the reason this is critical is because you get more information from your opponent every time you decide to bet or raise, right? Or maybe even just fold. Because you can bluff better. When your opponent checks you, it's more likely that they're weak. So you can more easily push them off the hand. You can also value bet your medium strength hands better, because when they check to you, it's more likely that your medium strength hand is pretty good. You can play your draws better, because when you do hit your flush or your straight, you can either bet or raise once they've decided what to do, rather than wondering whether you should check and try to let them bet. Because if you're out of position, you're not going to be sure whether to check or to just bet out. And so this allows you to play a much wider range when you're in position, and you can just take down the pot much more easily. And so basically this was just kind of a bunch of different topics that I wanted to teach you guys about, and if you just kind of keep all these in mind while you're playing, hopefully you'll just crush all your friends at poker. All right. Any questions?
Are we playing tonight?
We definitely can, yeah.
Yeah.
We should.
How often do we win?
How often do you win? Do I win?
Yeah.
Okay. It depends on who I'm playing.
Actual numbers here.
Yeah, if it's lead that I'm playing, it's pretty rare, because usually I'll get all my money in with the best hand, and he'll just get lucky every time, every single time.
Have you made a JavaScript module that calculates the odds based on the cards you have?
Oh, that's a good one.
That'd be cool.
Yeah, I actually have.
Oh,
Wait, what?
Yeah.
What's
Cool.
the name?
Repeat the question.
Show
Oh, the question was, have I made a JavaScript module that calculates the odds based on the cards you have? It was a very specific question. I don't remember if I told you about it already. But
I don't think so.
I didn't even know you'd done that. That's
Yeah.
Awesome.
How can you not mention this? That's really relevant, actually.
ArcticJS.
Nice.
it's not really a module.
Can we have a readme, please?
Yeah, it's not a very formalized, but
Everyone PRs right now.
basically it's just a bunch of JavaScript code to calculate, given 2 hands and a board, what's the percent probability of each hand winning.
How can we even trust that this is correct now?
Is that C?
Okay, guys, it's okay. So yeah, and there's actually one cool thing that I did with this, which is basically I wanted to see if there was a way for 2 people to be exactly 50-50 on a flop without having the exact same hand, obviously. And so I was looking for whether this was possible. I tried to like come up with an example by hand, but I was getting really close, but not quite there, like 49.8% or like 49.7%, but I couldn't get exactly 50%. And so since I had this code, I thought, oh, well, I'll just like use this and like generate random hands until I find one, right? And so I just kept doing that, and then I eventually found one. And then I just like decided to try to find whether there was one hand for every possible percentage that you could have. So is there a hand that wins like 37.8% of the time, right? Or like just given any number that you want, can you like find a hand? And so I actually did manage to find at least one hand for every single percentage. And then I took like a histogram of how likely each percentage was just based on picking random hands. And then I put that on a chart.
Cool.
And so this is what it looks like.
Ah, sweet.
So it was just kind of interesting to me that there was like a bit of a like shape here.
Yeah.
Somehow it's like very sparse out here, but then it like tightens in around here. So maybe this is like a weird little zone where everything is like reasonably likely.
Any statisticians among the audience? No?
Yeah, this is just something random that I thought of that was cool.
Interesting. That's pretty cool.
Cool.
I didn't know you could make this. I have a poker simulator too. It's written in Go.
And go.
That's funny.
Do you have any further plans?
Do you have any further plans with?
Yeah, like writing a book, moving to Nevada. I don't know. Something.
Moving to Nevada? I don't think I'll move to Nevada just yet, but we'll see. Yeah. All right. Any other questions? Okay. Cool. Oh yeah.
There's no income tax.